Join us every weeknight at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time, 10 p.m. Eastern. The Intrepid radio program, a Scotty Roberts Productions broadcast.
Well, happy Monday evening, everyone. Welcome to the program. I'm your host, Scotty Roberts. This is my show, The Intrepid radio program. Right here, you can find us on my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Scotty Roberts if you're not there already. And you can also, I got the little something playing somewhere. Let me see where that's playing. I'm picking up some feedback. I'm not sure where that is. Oh, I see where I am. It's over on my YouTube channel, which is open here as well. There you go. Sorry about that. Little technical glitch, but it's all fixed. So welcome to the program. Hope you had a great weekend. You forgot you were on the page, field guy. I knew you were here. I saw you here. So welcome. Glad to have you here. Glad to have Roger Rabbit here. Kalina, good to see you as well. And I see a whole bunch of you over there outside the chat. You can come on over to the chat room and join the conversation and join in and listen to what we've got for tonight. It's a little different. We're stepping away. We've done this before, but rather than get so serious and keep the tone so serious about everything, we're going to do a little storytelling, a little reading tonight. And I hope that you'll enjoy this. And it's going to be from Irish myth and legend. Here, I'll just show you the book. It's this book right here. And it's a treasury of Irish myth, legend, and folklore. And it was edited by William Butler Yeats and Lady Gregory. And so this book was compiled over 100 years ago. William Butler Yeats, if you don't know who he is, was the poet laureate of Ireland back at the turn of the 20th century, back over 100 years ago. So there's some a treasury, as the title says, of Celtic and Irish lore, folklore, mythology, poetry, and there's one particular story we're going to settle on for tonight. And I may have several years ago read this story on this show. This is a story I used to read to my own daughters, my older twin daughters, and my son Sam, and now my 3 kids. I've read this story to them a long time ago, and I thought it would be a nice change for the evening. I even lit a candle over my shoulder to commemorate the evening, to set the tone. And so, Monica, welcome to you as well. I see you over there. Glad to have you here. Randall Flagg has put in his lucky shamrock. I see he's got there. He says, "Hey, everyone." And so I'm glad to see you all, and I hope that you're going to enjoy this. Before we get into it too deeply, however, I want to, let's just preface this by going into just a little explanation of the fairy folk, if you don't know who they are. And if you don't know much about them, whoa, boy, that really lit up my screen, didn't it? So there's a white background here, and I've got some information here I wanted to share before we get too deep into this. So let me see. I'm not going to tone anything down. You'll just have to put up with it a little bit. But the word we're looking at the ish, she, and that is the Irish or the Gaelic for the fairy folk. The she. It's spelled Sidhe, pronounced she. And you hear the term she probably most often when you hear somebody say the word banshee. It's that word, that fairy word that's tacked onto the end. And this is who the she were. The she. This is an English approximation for it. it's an older form of the word, is the Irish name for the supernatural race in Celtic mythology. The Daoinshi, or Sith even, Sith, a slight variation, is what it is in the Scottish Gaelic. I don't know if that's where Lucas took his description of the Sith was from this, but they're not necessarily as evil as the Sith are supposed to be, so I would think not. But they're comparable to the Faeries and the elves, and that's where you get this term. And they're said to descend from the Tuatha De Danann, which we've talked about to great extent in some of my own books. The Tuatha, the De Danann. This is where we think they get the term the Anunnaki, the Tuatha De Anunnaki, the Danann, and it means the people of Danu, the goddess Danu. And this is according to pagan tradition. It's also said that there was something I just thought of, remembering that there was a tribe of Israel that broke off from Moses and the rest of Israel during the Exodus, or after the Exodus, during the wilderness sojourn. They're like, we've had enough of this. We're going to go north and settle ourselves. And they took boats and ships from the north of Egypt and took them up to the north of Israel. And they were the tribe of Dan. And so when you have the Tuatha De Danann, you've got the mixed meaning of the tribe of Dan, the tribe of the Anunnaki, and of course the goddess Danu. And this is supposed to be, according to all this mythology, where you had the kings of the great Eastern kings of Europe over the millennia, as the tribe of Dan spread, multiplied. They went west into Europe, and then they became the high lords and the kings of Ireland and what is Great Britain now. And so that's part of the mythology behind them. But this is the Tuatha De Danann, means the people of Danu. And the Ishi are said to live underground in fairy forts across the Western Sea, or in an invisible world that coexists with the world of humans. And this world is described in the Lebor Gabala Erin, the parallel universe in which the Ishi walk among the living. And in modern Irish, the people of the mounds are also called Daoin Shi. And in Scottish Gaelic, they're called Daoin Sheath or Seath. And in both cases, it means they're people of the fairy mound. And the fairy mounds, you've seen things. It'd be like the hills. You see a lot of the ancient graves, the Celtic grave sites, the grave mounds, and so the fairy mounds you can find deep in the woods and out in the wildernesses and so on. And they're said to live inside those, in the hollow hills, inside these mounds. And they're variously said to be the ancestors and the spirits of nature, the goddesses and the gods of the Celts. So the etymology of all this, Aoshi, means the people of the fairy mound, as she, Sidhe, is the way it's spelled in Gaelic or English version translation of Gaelic. It means the otherworldly mounds, the hills. And in modern Irish, the word is si or she. In Scottish Gaelic, it's Sith, S-I-T-H, or she, also pronounced. In Old Irish, it's the she, and the singular is she. And so by the time the Celtic revival, when the fairy faith became a topic for English and English language authors, the she, in its various forms with various meanings, became a loan word into English. It took on a variety of often inaccurate meanings. So the she, let's talk about them for a minute. The she are the hills or the tumuli that dot the Irish landscape. In modern English or Irish, the word is sea. And in Scottish Gaelic, it's in Old Irish, it's she and or seed, and the singular is seed. Not much difference. And in a number of later English language texts, the word she is incorrectly used for both the mounds and the people of the mounds. For example, Yeats, in this particular book, in 1908, when he edited this, he referred to the Eos she, or the Ishi, as the she. However, the she in older texts refers specifically to the palaces, the courts, the halls of residence of the otherworldly beings that supposedly inhabit them. And the fact that many of these she have been found to be ancient burial mounds has contributed to the theory that the Ishi were pre-Celtic occupants of Ireland. Now, David Fitzgerald conjectured that the word she was synonymous with immortal, and is compared with words such as shisit, or wait or remain is what it means. The shibio, or the lasting, the shivon, the perpetual, and the she, long life. And in most of the tales concerning the she, a great age or long life is implied. So in Irish folklore, in many Gaelic tales, the Ishi are later literary versions of the Tuatha De Danann, the people of the goddess Danu, and the deities and the deified ancestors of the Irish mythology. And so some sources describe them as the survivors of the Tuatha De Danann, who retreated into the other world when fleeing the mortal sons of Spain, who, like many other early invaders of Ireland, came from Iberia, or the Spanish peninsula, if you will. So as part of the terms of their surrender to the Milesians, the Tuatha De Danann agreed to retreat and dwell underground. And then you can hear my dog barking up there. It's not the Faeries. In later interpretations, each tribe of the Tuatha De Danann was given its own mound. Geoffrey Keating, an Irish historian of the early 17th century, equates Iberia with the land of the dead, providing a possible connection to the Ishi. And in folk belief and practice, the Ishi are often appeased with offerings, and care is taken to avoid angering or insulting them. As I mentioned very recently on this show, Rainey and I had done that at our own ranch, where we had 40 acres, and we went to all the wooded corners of the ranch, and we left little offerings. Not because we were worshiping false gods or anything like that, but we felt that the she are present, the fairy folk, the fae are present, and we left an offering for them to bless the ranch. And we did that at all four corners of the property. And that was 40 acres. You wouldn't think is a whole lot, but man, you walk it in the hills and through the woods and stuff. It was a little bit of a trek to do that. It took us a few hours to go around all the corners. But we left a little coin, something shiny. We left a cup of milk. We left little bits of crackers and cookies and things like that, sweets. And, you know, you say, it's the animals, I'm sure, ate those things out there. But we left it in good faith. So this is something that you did. You were trying to avoid angering or insulting them. And often they're not named directly, but they're rather spoken of as the good neighbors, or the fair folk, or simply the folk, or the wee people, or the good people. So I used the good people a lot when I wrote Tam O'Hare. And the most common names for them, the Ishi, the Acid, the Deoin Shi, the singular Dwin Shi, and the Deoin Shi mean literally people of the mounds, referring to the Shi. And they can also be terrible and hideous, as well as benevolent and beautiful. The Aishi are seen as fierce guardians of their abodes, whether a fairy hill, a fairy ring, which is something that grows in the woods. I had a friend that was out to the ranch one of the first years I owned it many years ago, before raining even. And we were walking through the woods, and there was a perfect circle of growth about 20 feet in diameter of mushrooms out in the thick of the woods. And he said, I've got this gut feeling that you're looking at a fairy ring. And at that time, I had never heard of those. And so you can find these things like special trees, the mushrooms, a hawthorn, or a particular lock or wood. It's believed that infringing on these spaces are going to cause the Aishi to retaliate in an effort to remove the people or objects that invaded their homes. And many of these tales contribute to the changeling myth, which was, by the way, very predominant in my book, The Rollicking Adventures of Tam O'Hare. We talked about the changelings, and that was a myth in Western Europe folklore, with the Ishi kidnapping trespassers or replacing their children with changelings as a punishment for transgressing, and they would take the child and raise it as their own in the fairy realms. The Aishi are often connected to certain times of the year and hours, as the Gaelic otherworld is believed to come together to the mortal world at the times of dusk and dawn, and the Aishi correspondingly became easier to encounter. And some festivals such as Samhain or Halloween, Beltane, and Midsummer are associated with the Ishi. And so there are all different kinds and types. We could talk about the Banshee, or the Banshee from the old Irish Banshee, which means woman of the she. We could talk about all of these other kinds of fairies that are out there. Here's a list of them. This is a list of the Fae and of the Banshee, or of the she. It's the Abertha, the Abhartak, some of these you'll recognize, the Abluachra, the Banshee, or the Bane-Ni, the Keonig, the Banshee, the Catchy, the Kushi, the Changeling, the Cleoadna, the Cluacron, the Dobharko. Some of these I'm not pronouncing right, so I don't pronounce all my Gaelic well. The Dobharku, the Dullahan, the Island Trenchant, the Faken, the Farderig, the Fir Gorta, the Umfir Liathmore, the Fetch, the Fuath, the Gankana, the Gillidu, and the Gillidu. It's different spellings, D-H-U and D-U-B-H. The Gillidu and the Gillidu. The Glastig, or the Glassin, the Glashtin, the Leonseed, the Leprechaun, the Marrow, or Mermaid, the Olafeast, the Puka, the Selkie, which is the mermaids as well, and the Slough, S-L-A-U-G-H. So we could go on and just go through the mythology of who they are and all the different names, but I wanted to get to a little story tonight. And before I do, I want to, pardon me as I step away from the mic for just a second. You'll be able to hear me as if I'm in the distance. So I'm going to go over here, and I need to grab a particular book. And I'm just looking to see where I put it. I think it's right here. No, that's not it. Hang on. I'm looking for it. Here it is. Here's the box of them. Which, by the way, this is, of course, my own book, which I've already talked about a couple times. The Rollicking Adventures of Tam O'Hare, that I wrote and illustrated. But I've got a scene in here where it just talks very briefly very briefly about the changeling. And let me see where exactly in the book I have that. Let's see. That's going to be. Let's see. It's not there. It's a little further on. Ah. Some exciting stuff in this book, too. Glenborough. Here you go. Now, this is where Tam O'Hare and his young squire, Horatio McNutt, walked in. Of course, they're animals. It's anthropomorphized. They walked because he'd gotten word that his young cousin, a little girl, had been stolen by the Fae. And his uncle tells him the story, Uncle Whitebeard, Argyle Whitebeard. Let's see where it is. I've got to find it. Sorry about that. Argyle took a deep breath. Low rock. 'Twas the good people. Here it is. He's telling Tam what happened to the young girl. This isn't the story we're going to read tonight. This is just a little excerpt from my own book where Tam is coming. So I'm coming in the middle of the story, well, the beginning of the story, middle of the beginning. And let's pick it up right here. His old uncle says, and he's Scottish, he says, I sure miss the likes of you around here, laddie, Argyle said to Tam, tears flooding his grey eyes. And now I have need of your aid like I've ne'er had before. It's my wee Brindlin. Argyle's voice cracked and trailed off into a soft sob. I know, uncle. I know. I'm here to help. Tam paused as best I can. But you mun be a hungered after such a lang journey, Argyle said, throwing his shoulders back and wiping his tears. Come to my home and take bread with us, and we'll talk more there. And Argyle leaned on his walking stick and held out his arm to the two tall kilted hares who helped him with his first few steps. And then it goes on to another part of the story, the little talk on the way. And they, let's see. The two sat in silence. This is before the dinner. After the two sat in silence for a few moments, then stood and began to stroll through the fragrant heather, as the old hare's brittle legs would allow. The air was fresh with spring, and bees hummed in the distance, while the long grass danced gracefully on the warm breeze, undulating like ocean waves rolling in over the heath. After a short distance, Tam stopped and turned toward his great uncle, breaking the silence. Tell me about Brindlin, Uncle Argyle. How do you know the wee folk took her? Argyle took in a deep breath and exhaled slowly. He pointed to a large, low rock beneath a wide oak tree, and they both sat and rested in the shade. 'Twas the good people that took her. This I ken for sure. Her mother went in to wake her 'twa Sabbaths past, as she was sleeping much later than the usual, but the wee lass wouldn't wake up at her mother's call, and when she went in to shake her gently and roused her from her sleep, it was then that her hands felt the coldness on little Brindlin. Leaning down, she put her face close to the child's and found that she wasna breathing. Beside herself, she ran out of the house and cried for me, and I came running as fast as my brittle legs could carry. Argyle stopped speaking and looked away. His gaze was distant, off in the mountains somewhere, but unfixed, focusing on nothing. He said not a word for a few minutes, then drew in a deep breath and spoke quietly. It was a black day, indeed, and there was muckle weeping and wailing for our little Brindlin had passed in the night. Please, uncle. Tam put his hand on Argyle's shoulder and squeezed. Go on. Argyle nodded and wiped his tears, which had begun flowing freely as he recounted the loss of his granddaughter. The women took the wee lass and washed her wee body and wrapped it in linen clothes. Then they went to fetch the lads to come carry little Brindleyn's body to the gravesite. That's when we kent it was the good people what took her. How did you know that? Tam asked, puzzled. Argyle shifted his position on the rock, turning to face Tam with his whole body, his voice nearly a whisper, his eyes wide and breathing fast and agitated. When we returned to fetch the wee lass's body, the grave clothes were empty. They still bore the impression of her wee body, but they were all empty and flat, and they found inside the linen wraps a wee twig of hawthorn. A twig? Asked Tam. Aye, a twig indeed, replied Argyle. It couldn't have been anything else. The good people placed a glamour on a hawthorn twig to make us believe it was the wee girl. The old hare then sat up straighter and leaned in toward Tam, all at once breathless and excitedly animated. But the fairy magics had worn away too soon. The good people looked on the sweet young lass in the night, then took her, leaving the glamoured twig in her place. Ah, had we only placed the protections about their windows and doors, we were sae careless, Tamerlane, sae careless. We should have kent that the good people would nae but love one's wee and sweet as she. And Argyle's voice trailed off. They both sat in silence for a short time. Then Argyle spoke again. They took her, Tamerlane. They left the hawthorn twig in her place. They meant for us to think it was her wha died in the night, and they took the sweet girl away to live with them. I've heard of these doings before, but never would I have thought. The old hare buried his face in his hands and sobbed. The good people wanted her for their very own, and they meant for us to bury the glamoured twig, thinking it was the wee girl, and go on as if she was gone from us forever. But you found the hawthorn twig. Their magic's worn off too soon, Tam repeated. Aye, the charmers were so charmed by the sweetness of the little girl, they took her for their own. It's their way, Tamerlane, said Argyle, his voice nearly a whisper. It's their way. These things are so out of my understanding, uncle, said Tam, shaking his head. And then there's little Malcolm, started Argyle. Malcolm was taken as well, asked Tam, with mounting distress. Nay, wee Malcolm, a sweet robin, my fair little gentle, is with us still, Tam, but he's so changed. And then the story goes on from there. But I wanted you to hear what a changeling was. That was the changeling. The story where the fairy folk would take little children. And this is one of the mythologies. It's still existent today. If you go into the backcountry in Ireland, they will believe that this is so. And is this the way some explain the death of children? Yes. Or the disappearance of children? Sure. But I tend to think there's more to it than that. I think the Fae are real. I do. So did William Butler Yeats in his poetry. He wrote of them. So let's see. What do we got here? We got a couple of comments. Hey, Scott Allen. Hey, Elvis. Good to see you. I've turned Irish or Scottish. So now I want to read for you a little story that's much older than the rollicking adventures of Tam O'Hare. And that was my purpose for tonight, was to read this tale after we talked a wee bit about the fairy folk. It comes out of this book, A Treasury of Irish Legend and Folklore. And it was edited or compiled by William Butler Yeats about 115 years ago or thereabouts. And he had some help with some people as well. I want to say hello to Jenny Davis and also to Robert Rust over in the Instagram, uh, on the Instagram broadcast. Come on over to the chat room on the YouTube channel if you want to join us over there. So let me get to this story. It's a little longer and it will use up the rest of the hour for sure. This is a tale I used to read to my children when they were very little. And read it many times. It's called Jamie Freel and the Young Lady. I put it as Jamie Freel and the Faeries because that's how I originally thought of it in my mind. It's Jamie Freel and the Young Lady, a Donegal tale. And it's by Miss Lilita McClintock. And here is how this tale goes. Now sit back, get a cup of something to drink, or a beer if you want, or a whiskey, or some tea, and enjoy this. Here's how this goes. Telling a story now. Jamie Freel and the Young Lady. Down in Fanet, in times gone by, lived Jamie Freel and his mother. Jamie was the widow's sole support. His strong arm worked for her untiringly, and as each Saturday night came round, he poured his wages into her lap, thanking her dutifully for the halfpence which she returned to him for tobacco. He was extolled by his neighbors as the best son ever known or heard of. But he had neighbors of whose opinion he was ignorant. Neighbors who lived pretty close to him, whom he had never seen, who are indeed rarely seen by mortals except on May Eves and Halloweens. An old ruined castle about a quarter mile from his cabin was said to be the abode of the wee folk. Every Halloween were the ancient windows lighted up, and passers-by saw little figures flitting to and fro inside the building, while they heard the music of pipes and flutes. It was well known that fairy revels took place, but nobody had the courage to intrude on them. Jamie had often watched the little figures from a distance and listened to the charming music, wondering what the inside of the castle was like. But one Halloween he got up and took his cap, saying to his mother, "I'm away to the castle to seek my fortune." "What?" she cried. "Would you venture there? You that's the poor widow's own one son. Dinna be sae venturous and foolish, Jamie. They'll kill you, and then what'll come of me?" "Never fear, mother. No harm will happen to me. But I must go." And he set out. And as he crossed the potato field, came in sight of the castle, whose windows were ablaze with light that seemed to turn the russet leaves, still clinging to the crabtree branches, into gold. Halting in the grove at one side of the ruin, he listened to the elven revelry, and the laughter and the singing made him all the more determined to proceed. Numbers of little people, the largest about the size of a child of 5 years old, were dancing in the music of the flutes and the fiddles, while others drank and feasted. "Welcome, Jamie Freel! Welcome, welcome, Jamie!" cried the company, perceiving their visitor. The word welcome was caught up and repeated by every voice in the castle. Time flew, and Jamie was enjoying himself very much, when his host said, "We're going to ride to Dublin tonight to steal a young lady. Will you come too, Jamie Freel?" Aye, that I will, cried Jamie, with the rash youth, thirsting for adventure. A troop of horses stood at the door. Jamie mounted his steed, and his steed rose with him into the air. He was presently flying over his mother's cottage, surrounded by the elven troop, and on they went over bold mountains, over little hills, over the deep low Swilly, over towns and cottages when people were burning nuts and eating apples and keeping merry Halloween. It seemed to Jamie that they flew all round Ireland before they got to Dublin. "This is Derry," said the fairies, flying over the cathedral's spire, and what was said by one voice was repeated by all the rest, till 50 little voices were crying out, "Derry, Derry, Derry!" In like manner was Jamie informed as they passed over each town on the route, and at length he heard the silvery voices cry, "Dublin, Dublin!" In like manner was Jamie informed as they passed over each town. And it was no mean dwelling that was to be honored by the fairy visit, but one of the finest houses in Stephen's Green. The troop dismounted near a window, and Jamie saw a beautiful face on a pillow in a splendid bed. He saw the young lady lifted and carried away, while the stick which was dropped in her place on the bed took her exact form. The lady was placed before one rider and carried a short way, then given another, and the names and the towns were cried out as before. They were approaching home. Jamie heard Rathmullen, Milford, Tamney, and then he knew they were near his own house. "You've all had your turn at carrying the young lady," he said. "Why wouldn't I get her for a wee piece?" "Aye," Jamie replied they pleasantly, "you may take your turn at carrying her, to be sure." Holding his prize very tightly, he dropped down near his mother's door. Jamie Freel, is that the way you treat us?" cried they, and they too dropped down near the door. Jamie held fast, though he knew not what he was holding, for the little folk turned the lady into all sorts of strange shapes. At one moment she was a black dog, barking and trying to bite. At another, a glowing bar of iron, which yet had no heat, and then again a sack of wool. But still Jamie held her tight, and the baffled elves were turning away, when a tiny woman, the smallest of the party, exclaimed, "Jamie Freel has her away from us, but he shall hae nae good on her, for I'll make her deaf and dumb." And she threw something over the young girl. And while they rode off disappointed, Jamie lifted the latch and went in. "Jamie, man," cried his mother, "you've been away all night. What have they done on you?" "Nothing bad, mother. I had the very best of good luck. Here's a beautiful young lady I have brought you for company." "Bless us and save us!" exclaimed the mother, and for some minutes she was so astonished that she could not think of anything else to say. Jamie told her the story of the night's adventure, ending by saying, "Surely you wouldn't have allowed me to let her gang with them till be lost forever." "But a lady, Jamie! How can a lady eat weir poor diet and live in weir poor way? I ask you that, you foolish fellow." "Well, mother, sure it's better for her to be here, not over yonder," and he pointed in the direction of the castle. Meanwhile, the deaf and dumb girl shivered in her light clothing, stepping close to the humble turf fire. "Poor creature, she's queer and handsome." "Nae wonder they set their hearts on her," said the old woman, gazing at her guest with pity and admiration. "We mun dress her first, but what in the name of fortune hae I to fit the likes of her to wear?" She went to her press in the room and took out her Sunday gown of brown drugget. She then opened a drawer and drew forth a pair of white stockings, a long snowy garment of fine linen, and a cap, her dead dress, as she called it. These articles of attire had long been ready for a certain tryst ceremony in which she would some day fill the chief part, and only saw the light occasionally when they were hung out to air. But she was willing to give even these to the fair trembling visitor, who was turning in dumb sorrow and wonder from her to Jamie, and from Jamie back to her. The poor girl sniffed herself to be dressed, suffered herself to be dressed, and then sat down on a creepy in the chimney corner and buried her face in her hands. "What'll we do to keep a lady up like you?" cried the old woman. "I'll work for you both, mother," replied the son. "And how could a lady live on we're poor diet?" she repeated. "I'll work for her," was all Jamie's answer. He kept his word. The young lady was very sad for a long time, and tears stole down her cheeks many an evening, while the old woman spun by the fire, and Jamie made salmon nets, an accomplishment lately acquired by him in hopes of adding to the comfort of his guest. But she was always gentle, and tried to smile when she perceived them looking at her, and by degrees she adapted herself to their ways and mode of life. It was not very long before she began to feed the pig, mash potatoes, and meal for the fowls, and knit blue worsted socks. So a year passed, and Halloween came round again. "Mother," said Jamie, taking down his cap, "I'm off to the old castle to seek my fortune." "Are you mad, Jamie?" cried his mother in terror. "Sure they'll kill you for this time for what you done on them last year." Jamie made light of her fears and went his way. As he reached the Crabtree Grove, he saw bright lights in the castle windows as before, and heard loud talking. Creeping under the window, he heard the wee folk say, "That was a poor trick Jamie Freel played on us this night last year, when he stole that nice young lady from us." "Aye," said the tiny woman, "and I punished him for it, for there she sits, a dumb image by his hearth. But he doesna know that 3 drops out of this glass I hold in my hand would give her her hearing and her speeches back again." Jamie's heart beat fast as he entered the hall. Again he was greeted by chorus of welcomes from the company. "Here comes Jamie Freel! Welcome, welcome, Jamie!" As soon as the tumult subsided, the little woman said, "You be to drink our health, Jamie, out of this glass in my hand." Jamie snatched the glass from her and darted to the door. He never knew how he reached his cabin, but he arrived there breathless and sank on a stove by the fires. "You're killed surely this time, my poor boy," said his mother. "No, indeed. Better luck than ever this time." And he gave the lady 3 drops of the liquid that still remained at the bottom of the glass, notwithstanding his mad race over the potato field. The lady began to speak, and her first words were words of thanks to Jamie. The 3 inmates of the cabin had so much to say to one another that long after cockcrow, when the fairy music had quite ceased, they were talking around the fire. "Jamie," said the lady, "be pleased to get the paper and pen and ink, that I may write to my father and tell him what has become of me." She wrote, but 3 weeks passed, and she received no answer. Again and again she wrote, and still no answer. At length she said, "You must come with me to Dublin, Jamie, to find my father." "I had no money to hire a car for you," he repeated. He replied, "And how can you travel to Dublin on your foot?" But she implored him so much that he consented to set out with her and walk all the way from Thanet to Dublin. It was not as easy as the ferry journey, but at last They rang the bell at the great house of the door in Stephen's Green. "Tell my father that his daughter is here," she said to the servant who opened the door. "The gentleman that lives here has no daughter, my girl. He had one, but she died better nor a year ago." "Do you not know me, Sullivan?" "No, poor girl, I do not." "Let me see this gentleman. I only ask to see him." "Well, that's not much of the axe. We'll see what can be done." And in a few moments the lady's father came to the door. "Dear father," she said, "don't you know me?" "How dare you call me your father?" cried the old gentleman angrily. "You are an impostor. I have no daughter." "Look in my face, father, and surely you'll remember me." "The daughter is dead and buried. She died a long time ago." The old gentleman's voice changed from anger to sorrow. "You can go," he concluded. "Stop, dear father, till you look at this ring on my finger. Look at your name and mine engraved on it." "It certainly is my daughter's ring, but I do not know how you came by it. I fear in no honest way." "Call my mother. She will be sure to know me," said the poor girl, who by this time was crying bitterly. "My poor wife is beginning to forget her sorrow. She seldom speaks of her daughter now. Why should I renew her grief by reminding her of her loss?" But the young lady persevered, till at last the mother was sent for. "Mother," she began, when the old lady came to the door, "don't you know your daughter?" "I have no daughter. My daughter died and was buried a long, long time ago." "Only look in my face, and surely you'll know me." The old lady shook her head. "You have all forgotten me. But look at this mole on my neck. Surely, mother, you know me now." "Yes, yes," said the mother. "My Gracie had a mole on her neck like that. But then I saw her in the coffin and saw the lid shut down upon her." It became Jamie's turn to speak, and he gave the history of the fairy journey, of the theft of the young lady, of the figure he had seen laid in its place, of her life with his mother in Fanet, of last Halloween, and of the 3 drops that had released her from the enchantment. She took up the story when he paused, and told how the mother and son had been kind to her. The parents could not make enough of Jamie. They treated him with every distinction, and when he expressed his wish to return to Fanet, said they did not know what to do to show their gratitude. But an awkward complication arose. The daughter would not let him go without her. "If Jamie goes, I'll go too," she said. "He saved me from the Faeries, and has worked for me ever since. If it had not been for him, dear father and mother, you would never have seen me again. If he goes, I go too." This being her resolution, the old gentleman said that Jamie should become his son-in-law. The mother was brought from Fanet in a coach and 4, and there was a splendid wedding. They all lived together in the grand Dublin house, and Jamie was heir to untold wealth at his father-in-law's death. And that's the end of Jamie Freel and the young lady. And I'll read one more thing for you here. You may have heard this as a song. It's called The Stolen Child. This one is by William Butler Yeats himself. Lorena McKennitt, if you're familiar with her music, she put this to music and recorded it many years ago. And you may have heard it, but here's how it goes. I used part of this in Tam O'Hare in the beginning of the book. I used part of the chorus for the opening of the book. It's called The Stolen Child by William Butler Yeats.
Where dips the rocky highland of Sleuthwood in the lake, there lies a leafy island where flapping herons wake the drowsy water rats. There we've hid our fairy vats, full of berries and of reddest golden stolen cherries. Come away, O human child, to the woods and waters wild, with a fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. Where the wave of moonlight glosses the dim grey sands with light, far off by furthest Rosses we foot it all the night, weaving olden dances, mingling hands and mingling glances, till the moon has taken flight. To and fro we weep, we leap, and chase the frothy bubbles, while the world is full of troubles and is anxious in its sleep. Come away, O human child, to the woods and waters wild, with a fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. Where the wandering water gushes from the hills above Glencar, in pools among the rushes that scarce could bathe a star, we seek for slumbering trout, and whispering in their ears, we give them evil dreams, leaning softly out from ferns that drop their tears of dew on the young streams. Come, O human child, to the woods and waters wild, with a fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. Away with us he's going, the solemn-eyed. He'll hear no more the lowing of the calves on the warm hillside, or the kettle on the hob sing peace into his breast, or see the brown mice bob round and round the oatmeal chest. For he comes, the human child, to the woods and waters wild, with a fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than he can understand. There you go. From the treasury of Irish myth, legend, and folklore, put together by William Butler Yeats and Lady Gregory. Well worth getting. You can pick this up online. The cover looks like I've still got the here it is. I've still got the you see a lot of the covers look like that. And so that's the dust jacket. It's got Cucullin on the back cover. So you should pick that book up if you want to read more. And there's a lot in here to read. Look at that, the size of that tome. So there you go. There's that. Now, before we're totally done, I want you to see how many years ago would it be? 1998 was when I started writing this book. And I wrote it, and it was much shorter. And my agent took it to publishers who said, wonderful story, but it's not long enough for a chapter book, and it's too short for a picture book. So have your author realize it one way or the other. And so I took the manuscript, put it in my file cabinet, and didn't touch it again for several years. And as a matter of fact, it was after Rainey and I met and started dating in 2005, and by 2006 we were together under the same roof with my kids and her. We hadn't had our own kids yet, obviously, at that point. And so 2006 was when we started living together after about a year of knowing each other. And it was then and only then that I went back and said, I really ought to finish up Tam O'Hare. I should add more to it. Randall Flagg has friends in Derry, by the way. And there's something I want you to hear in this book, because I want you to see how greatly influenced I was 30 years ago when I originally read that story to my kids and read a lot about the fairy folk. And this part of the book kind of gives away a bit of the ending of Tam O'Hare. But I want you to hear this. This is late in the book, and you can kind of pick up where we're at in the story. You'll have to pick it up if you want to read the whole story, or you can hear it here on my YouTube channel. You can just go to down below on my main page, and you can see more about Tam O'Hare and all the readings I did for the story. So here we go. I'm going to read this chapter to you, and I want you to see the similarities because of how I was influenced by these mythologies and these legends. This is from chapter 13, entitled The Hole in the Stone. Aberfeldy was a 2.5-day walk from Edinburgh. Tam and McNutt rode a ferry across the Firth of Forth and walked straight north to the town of Perth, where they spent the night in an inn. The next morning they walked until they found the River Tay and followed it to Aberfeldy. The countryside was beautiful, and its freshness was a welcome change from the deck of a ship, politics, and battle. You can see how much of the book you don't know about by just that line. Tam could finally focus all his energy on finding wee Brindolin. Remember the little girl who'd been stolen by the Faeries. After stopping at a public house for some food, the pair continued a few miles along the River Tay until it spilled into the long, narrow loch bearing the same name. They crossed the river and headed along the south shore. You had said that you didn't understand the good people, Uncle, considered McNutt. What is it that's so mysterious about them? Tam thought for a moment. They are creatures of the Almighty's that do not seem to fit into this world, at least not in the way we think they should. They are here, yet apart. Tam stopped and looked out over the waters of the loch. He stooped down and scooped up a palmful of dirt, then spread his fingers, letting it sift through and drop slowly to the ground. We want everything to be as solid as the ground on which we walk. We want to be able to touch it, see it, feel it. Then and only then will we believe in it. Rather, how we tend to treat the Almighty himself, eh? Postulated McNutt in more of a statement than a direct question. Aye, smiled Tam. Rather like that. We always want proof, yet for the things that are truly important, there rarely ever is. Tam let the last of the dirt spill out of his hand and then brushed his palms together, dusting them clean. McNutt pondered for a moment, then continued, Do you fear the good people? I fear what I do not understand, answered Tam. Then to understanding something, paused McNutt, eliminates fear? No, not always, replied Tam, but it does pull away the shroud of confusion. I was always taught that God is not the author of confusion, but of a sound mind. With the absence of confusion, clarity finds its path. With clarity comes boldness and the washing away of fear. They walked on in silence for a bit. The waters of the loch lapped gently on the shore, and distant birds echoed in the greenwood around them. The place seemed to hum softly, and Tam was certain he could hear the faint lull of the pipes on the breeze. McNutt thought he heard it too, but when they'd stopped to listen, there was nothing. Chills ran up the back of Tam's neck, but it wasn't from fear, for he felt only peace in his heart. His eyes began to water. The McNutt had tears as well, but they said nothing. They walked on for a short distance when a very strange, quite unexplainable thing happened. No longer were they just two walking along down the path, but three. There was no sudden, startling fear, no wretched awareness of the mystical, only peace. Without any explanation or introduction, without sound or rush of wind, without fanfare or incantation, there they were walking along the shore with the old badger of Loch Tay. The old mystic's face seemed to shine, not with a light of some form, but with a peacefulness that filled the woods around them. Then there it was again, the sound of pipes on the breeze. And this time Tam could hear them clearly. They were soft and lilting, wafting with the undulation of the gentle gusting of the wind. They were both sad and sweet all at once. Your little Brindlin has indeed been charmed away by the good people, said the gentle, brittle voice of the old badger, who walked between Tam and McNutt with his arms around them both. What must I do to find her and bring her home? Asked Tam, unsure of why the tears were beginning to stream down his face. You may not be able to, said the old one, and if you try, you may not be able to return yourself. Tam thought on this for a moment, then asked again, pausing on each word, what must I do? The old badger stopped and turned away from Tam. He looked deeply into McNutt's eyes, then took the young squirrel's hand in his own, holding it gently yet very firmly. He turned back toward Tam, never loosening his grip on McNutt's hand. Look into the forest, he said to Tam. Do you see that standing stone? Tam looked away from the shore toward the edge of the woods, and sure if there wasn't a thick, stout, standing stone, worn and cracked with the fissures of time, covered in vines and all overgrown with moss. As he approached it, he noticed that it was only slightly taller than himself, with a large, smooth hole in the center, about the size of a small wagon wheel. The exposed portions of the stone surface revealed that it was dark bluish-black in color and was cool to the touch. McNutt started to walk toward Tam, curious about the standing stone, but the badger held his hand in firm but gentle resistance. McNutt didn't know why, but he understood and remained where he was. And by the way, here is the illustration in the book of Tam McNutt and the old badger at Loch Tay. There you go. Doesn't reproduce well on the camera like that, but that was it. All that is around you is not. And all that around you is, said the old badger to Tam. Brindlin is here with us, yet she's not. Forgive me, but you speak in riddles, said Tam softly, and I do not understand. Do not understand, replied the old one. Believe. What must I do? Tam replied and pleaded. Thrice through the heart and the world will depart, chanted the old badger. Pass yourself through the stone center 3 times, all the while your thoughts only on your wee Brindlin. 3 times, Tam repeated under his breath, as he slowly turned away and stepped closer to the stone. He threw a quick glance back over his shoulder at Horatio McNutt and the old badger before pushing away the vines, obscuring the hole through the stone's center. He then stooped down and stepped through the opening to the other side of the stone. He walked back around to the front of the stone and stepped through again, all the while thinking of Brindlin and how frightened she must be. When he emerged on the other side, he turned and came round to the front once again, glancing at the two standing on the shore. He hesitated for a brief moment. The sound of the loch and the greenwood blended into the ethereal sound of the pipes that had now grown even more distinct, filling the air around him. Tam stepped up and through the stones, hewn out center for the third time, and when he passed to the other side, the woods were suddenly filled with light. By the way, this is Tam emerging from the hole in the stone on the other side after the third time. When he passed to the other side, the woods were suddenly filled with a light, low, nearly transparent mist that floated just below Tam's knees. He turned back around to the front of the stone. His squire and the old badger were gone. The sun was glinting off the loch, tinting everything a golden hue. The trees were lush with the bright colors of autumn. The sad, sweet pipes were now no longer merely a distant sound echoing over the waters of the loch, but they melted into the hum of the very essence of the world around him. Tam wasn't sure if they were really even there, or if the world or if the wind was playing tricks on his ears, but he felt as if he could touch the very music with the tips of his fingers and taste the notes on his tongue. He closed his eyes, turned his face skyward, and breathed in deep, filling his lungs, it seemed as if for the first time. "Welcome, Tam. Welcome, Tam O'Hare. Welcome, welcome," came several small voices from behind him. He turned and saw a group of tiny folk who looked like young children, yet smaller. The tallest of them came no higher than Tam's waist, and they all gathered around him with genuine smiles. The wee folk took Tam by the hands and led him along a path through the woods away from the loch. All the while, they asked him joyously if he would join them in the feasting and dancing. "I would love nothing better," Tam said, with happiness flooding his heart. Up ahead, Tam could see a clearing in the wood with an enormous fire burning at the center. Hundreds of the good people were dancing in a ring around the fire, singing along with the tune the pipes were echoing in the wood. As Tam entered the clearing, the wee folk who had greeted him broke off and ran in all directions, some to the dance and others to the sprawling, ornately carved oaken tables filled with every sort of delicious food and drink imaginable. Several of the dancers came to Tam and pulled him into the ring where he joined hands and kicked up his feet, singing along with the rest of them, and he danced and danced and danced for what seemed like hours. Yet he never grew tired or weary. He went to the tables, ate and drank, singing songs, not caring how he knew the words, and then he danced some more. And he was filled with happiness, beyond happiness, really. For the first time in his life, he was filled with joy. The sky glowed with golden hues, and pink billowy clouds floated over the treetops. With a handful of grapes and a goblet of sweet wine, Tam walked down the path to the shore of the loch and sat on the hillside. There were wee folk lazing all around him and peaceful, sweet pipes wafted on the gentle breeze. Tam had never been happier or more filled with peace at any time in his life. He drank deeply from his goblet, draining it. Then, after setting it down in the grass beside him, he lay his head back and looked into the clouds, where he watched a white bird floating gracefully on the breeze. That, by the way, is an allusion to something that happened earlier in the story. He blinked twice, sat up and looked toward the loch, elbow on his bent knee. Then he saw her. Sitting on the ground before the old standing stone was little Brindolin. She had several of the wee folk around her, and she was playing a wooden flute for them as they sat quietly listening. Tam stood to his feet and moved toward the girl, drawn by the lulling peacefulness of the flute. The music was beautiful. "Ah, me," said Tam with a soft smile. "If only your grandfather could hear you play such beautiful music." And in that instant, his wits came rushing back to him. The beauty and peace of this place had charmed him, and until this very moment, he had lost all sense of why he had come. He stepped closer to Brindolin and knelt down beside her. Reaching up, he gently took the flute from her hands, and she smiled at him. There is that illustration in the book. "Why, hello, Cousin Tam," she said in a crisp little voice that sparkled like the sun on living water. "Hello, my sweet," said Tam, tears flooding his eyes. "I've come to bring you home." She looked around a bit confused, then back at Tam. But I am home, cousin," she said cheerfully. Tam took her by the hands and said gently, "No, my little bird. I mean home to your family at Glenborough." Brindolin furrowed her brow for a bit. Then a wee smile slowly filled her face. "Ah, Grandfather Whitebeard!" she exclaimed. "I remember him and Sister Abigail and Mither." The little girl's entire essence seemed to smile at Tam, who could only but smile back with all his heart. Then suddenly, and with some sense of urgency, she pulled her hands out of Tam's and stood to her feet. Turning to a nearby bush of yellow roses, she reached in, avoiding the thorns, and plucked a single blossom. She turned back to Tam and tenderly took his hand in hers. Upturning his palm, in his hand she placed the delicate yellow rose. "Give this to my sister, for I ken that you love her," the wee girl said brightly, "and tell all my family that I love them too with all my heart." Tam looked at the rose in his hand, and a strange thing started to happen. He could see through his hand to the ground below. Then, looking at Brindolin, he could see the hazy lock through her as she began to dissolve before his very eyes. All around him, the wee folk were sweetly saying, "Goodbye, Tam O'Hare. Goodbye. Do come again, Tam O'Hare, when you can stay and dance with us some more." Tam looked at Brindolin, who was almost a mist. "No, don't go. Come with me, lass," he cried. "I canna, cousin. I belong here," she replied. "The wee rose will live as long as you ne'er let it touch the ground, cousin." Her voice echoed off, till it was as thin as the evening mist. "Be happy, Cousin Tam. Be happy. Be happy." Then she was gone. Tam sat all alone on the shore of Loch Tay. The air was cool and crisp and blue, and the sun was rising over the eastern hills. He wondered if he'd been dreaming, but there was the yellow rose in the palm of his hand. He was still on his knees in front of the old standing stone. He looked, but McNutt and the old badger were not waiting there where he had left them. They must have taken shelter for the night. Had it been all night? In his heart he felt that he had broken his word to Uncle Argyle, and it was going to break Abigail's heart. He had failed, and little Brindolin was still under the enchantments of the good people. She was gone from them, and there was nothing Tam nor anyone could do. He sat on the ground with his back against the standing stone, and with his face in his hands he wept. and high on the air, the pipes lilted softly. And never was piping so sad, and never was piping so sweet. And there's a few more chapters in this, which I won't read to you, where you discover a little bit more about what had happened. So there you are. There is Irish folklore. The old story of Jamie Freel and the young lady and his encounter with the fairy folk. And then my little version of Tam O'Hare and his encounter with the wee folk. So, oh, Roger, I'm glad she fell asleep. That's good. So there we go, folks. That's all I got for now. We're going to get out of here. We'll come back in a few minutes with the captain's cabin. If you want to talk about any of this, we can. Anything that comes to your mind, we can do that as well. So all of you over there who gathered over in Instagram, I hope you enjoyed it as well. Rowdy Rod Clown, Rust Robert, Jenny Davis. Who else did we have? N.C. Anderson and Janice Ananuzia. Thanks for being here over there in the and anybody else who happened to pass through. And all of you here, thank you for being here for the show. And we're going to go out to break. You're welcome, Roger Rabbit. It's always a reminder for me too when I read those. Glad they exist. And I hope they go on long after I do. So let's cut out to break without further ado. And we'll be back. You sit here and stay tuned. To those of you who have to leave before we come back, thanks for being here and live long and prosper.
The Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Hey folks, this is Scotty Roberts, and this is the Intrepid radio broadcast. I've been broadcasting for about 20 years now, covering such topics as science, politics, the paranormal, weird science, weird world history, archaeology, and the paranormal. Everything from ghosts to cryptids to creepy things that go bump in the night. So every week I bring you 3 new episodes. Come and join my channel and also be a patron to this site. So see the details below, and we'll see you here.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hi, my dad. So he can take me to Disneyland.
Dave, I love you, brother.
I miss you too.
I miss you too, I heard.
Yep,
Did you guys hear that?
I heard that.
I miss you, Dave.
Well, and welcome to the captain's cabin. This is our little after show, and I want to thank you for being here tonight and joining me in the show. Happy Monday to all of you. This is where we just a little falling action from the show, and if you want to call in and talk about anything, you're certainly welcome to. Let's see. What's everybody have to say? Thank you kind of reminds me of the movie The Borrowers, which I felt my childhood was just so ruined. I felt my childhood was just so ruined. No dominoes or that movie until my 30s. Well, I remember the movie The Borrowers, but I remember it, but I don't remember it. Let's put it that way. I remember the movie, and I probably saw it when I was younger, but I don't remember anything about it. So, is that the one about something about small people, the wee folk, and so on? I don't remember if that's the one I'm thinking of. Another good book, if you want to read, Charles DeLint is a fantastic author. They call him a modern urban. How did they put it? Not a folklorist. I can't think of the word they used for him. A modern myth teller, storyteller. But they put the word modern in because the word that followed it usually has a more ancient connotation. So it was like a modern bard or a modern urban legend type of writing. And he writes a lot about mystery, about ghosts, about Celtic mythology. He wrote a book called I think it's called The Small People. And it takes place in England, in Cornwall, all the way out to the West End. You look at a map of Britain, that West End that goes all the way out. And it's way out there where Penzance is, and Mousehole is a little town that he has in there. And it deals with some of the same stuff, only it's set in a modern setting. Urban fantasy. That's what they say he writes. Urban fantasy. So, let's see. What's anybody else have to say here? I gotta put on my glasses. My eyes are still really funky and wonky until they get all healed up and I get a new pair of glasses, I'm sure. Let's see. Yes, Little People in the Floor, a very cute story like this one you wrote. Thank you, Monica. Yeah, it's I vaguely remember that from when I was a kid. He'll be back for the captain's cabin, the after show in a couple of minutes. Stick around, says Roger. And you're welcome again, Roger. He says, thank you for reading these. You're most welcome. And, he said, yeah, I've been letting Kinsey listen to your reading. She fell asleep peacefully on my chest. That's nice. Lucky Charms is my favorite cereal. Oh, they're always after me, Lucky Charms. Elvis. So says Elvis. Elvis is eating charms in the building. Randall Flagg has friends in Derry. I wish I were back home in Derry, goes one of the very sad old Irish songs. Elvis says, I've turned Irish. Smashing the like button. Thank you. Yes, folks, if you're listening over in YouTube, do hit the like button. That helps me and it helps the show. So thank you very much in advance for doing that. I appreciate it. Let's see. Not many comments tonight, not a lot of conversation, but still all the same. Thanks for being here, everybody that was here. So we're not going to go too much more. No, I'm not going to. I'm just going to read something else out of the book, but I'm not going to. So we're done with that for tonight. And I think what I'll do, since we've gone an hour and a half now, it's 10:30 here. It's 11:30 out east. And I think it's, let's just call it an evening, shall we? Thank you for letting me read to you. I really enjoyed it. I enjoy these stories. Do these once in a while. And Roger says, it was such a dreary day here. It seems fitting you read stories like those tonight. The energy today seems very calm and relaxed. This was a great way to end the day. Thanks, Roger. It calms me to read these too, believe it or not. It's very calming for me. And so, I hope you enjoyed it. One of these days, and I got to do it sooner than later, I've been wanting to write the next book in the Tam O'Hare series. And I once read a little something from that, and I'm not even sure where I've got it anymore. I had it online, and that was about the only place I could find it. It was just a piece. It was about Walter O'Core is a young novice in a monastery. How the book opens up, and there's some secret ceremony that's taking place with the priests, and the priest, Brother Fitzsimmons, and who's a big bear, and Walter O'Core is a rabbit, like Tam O'Hare. And I read a part of that once, and that was all I had ever gotten written of that story before it got shelved in the busyness of life many years ago now. And I'll have to pick that up one of these days. I don't think I'll take a look. It's very short, but if I have it, it's called Tam O'Hare and the Banshee of Ballyglenmorrow. Let's see if I've got that anywhere. Ballyglenmorrow. Perhaps not. I may not have that in here. It's somewhere. We'll find it some night and we'll read that. It's very short compared to what I've already read tonight. But we'll see if it finds it for us. So, Tam O'Hare and the Banshee of Ballyglenmorrow. And you know what Banshee are. They're part of the She. They are the keening women who cry out at the death of some great Irish warrior or leader or person. You hear them cry out in the night. And there are other times they cry out as well, but if you were ever to see one, you could see them usually at the riverside in the woods by the moonlight, if there's a moon that night, standing usually in a long white shift that drops to the ground, and it's stained with blood and water. You know how that looks when you have a wet garment that has blood that will soak into it, or like I think of a pigment soaking into it. And she keens out or cries out in sorrow at the death of some Irish person. And she's usually seen at the creekside trying to wash the blood stains out of her white garment. And she has a comb. She's sometimes seen combing her long hair with a silver comb at the bank of the river. And it is said that if you take the comb of a banshee, if you stole it, that there are consequences for that. Hauntings. And so the story in the Tam O'Hare and the Banshee of Ballyglenmorrow is the son of an old friend of his, an old war ally, comes to him because his grandfather had stolen the comb, the silver comb of a banshee. And there was haunting and consequence out of that. And so Tam goes on this great adventure exploration to find the stolen comb, along with the son of his friend, and of course Horatio McNutt, his squirrel squire. And they end up traversing the globe, and they end up in the courts of China, in empirical China. In the Tam O'Hare takes place in the 1540s. 1540s to 1600, in that range of years. So the first book, remember, one of the subplots in this book, if you didn't know the book, is the conflict between Mary, Queen of Scots, and Elizabeth I of England. Tudor England. So there you go. There is that. So that's what that book is about. And of course, little Walter O'Core and the secret that they are part of in this ritual is a mystical beginning to what happens and takes place in the story. I'm going to try one other search and see if it comes up. Let's see. Oh, hold on. See if this even comes up. Oh. Here we go. Those of you who are left here, would you like to hear this? It's not very long. This is the beginning of, I have it apparently buried on my website. I thought, why don't I just do a Google search for Ballyglenmorrow? So here it is. I see there's a handful of you left. You'll get to hear this. Hey, Elvin Doll, over on my my Instagram. I used to work with her at Taps Paramag. She was our designer when I was the editor-in-chief over there. I don't know if you're still sitting over there, but I see that you checked in. So nice to see you there. So, yes, Monica, change of pace. So if y'all are still here, listen to this. This is on my website. It's on my Facebook page. I posted this. Here's how old this is. December 11th of 2012. So 12 years ago, I posted this as a story on my Facebook page. So this is how this goes. This is what I wrote that day. Tam O'Hare news. Frankly, there isn't much new news to tell. Tam O'Hare has had several approaches made by producer types who would like to see it brought to a full-length animated feature film status, but no movement beyond those initial contacts. I have also been approached by a new agent willing to work Tam O'Hare into a new line of books with a larger publisher, but to date that has still gone nowhere beyond the talk stages. Perhaps I've been too busy with other projects to give Tam much attention. I've had Tam O'Hare and the Banshee of Ballyglenmorrow in the works for a few years, but there it sits on the back burner awaiting my time and my attention. Perhaps I should simply create a new illustration from the book, and that will fire my engines. Here's the briefest of peeks into the opening of this next book. Some of you may recognize remnants of an earlier incarnation of this. Now, folks, if you're still with me and you're still listening, this is how it goes. Roger, thank you. He said you should definitely start writing this second book. It would get more brownie points than radio time around there. I hope so. That would be awfully nice. So here it is. This will take less than 10 minutes probably to read this. So, right here. Walter, wake now. Walter O'Core's eyes snapped open before the echo of the whispered command had barely faded from his ears. He sat up in his still standold feet over the side of the bed, expecting to find Father Fitzsimmons standing there. But his cell was empty and dark. The voice had come more frequently these days, and he had nearly grown accustomed to it, in the same way that one grows accustomed to a deeply embedded thorn in the sole of a foot. Tonight, however, the disembodied words sent a bristling shiver from the base of his neck and down his back, nearly to the tips of his toes. He dared not mention it to the brothers, and only hinted at it to the other novices. He didn't want them to think him mad, or worse, in league with some evil spirit who spoke to him from the netherworld. For comfort's sake, he assured himself it was the voice of an angel. His angel, sent from God to watch over him since he'd come to this place. Oh, how he missed his family. Only a few hours earlier, he had lain atop his blanket without removing his rough, homespun robe, whose rope belt had twisted uncomfortably around his waist during his brief slumber. He had not intended to fall asleep, but as with most of the young hares his age, he was out cold within minutes of his head touching the pillow, and now he struggled to shake off the hard sleep that had engulfed him so quickly and thoroughly. He stood to his feet and tugged at the folds of his brown cassock, managing some semblance of reshovelment. He could just as easily have untied and reknotted the rope belt, but why to go out to all that trouble? He climbed atop his bed to reach the room's solitary window high in the wall and pulled back the heavy cloth covering, letting in a shaft of white light from the full moon that had risen above the tree line. The night sky was crisp and clear, but the air was heady and tempestuous. Leafless, gnarled branches, black against the silvery moonlit sky, bent and swayed, groaning in baritone harmony with the wailing autumn wind. Pale yellow grasses swept along the hillside in undulant waves. A flaxen surf breaking against the rocky crags jutting heavenward at the base of Slowy Core's massive green mound. Walter could see the moonlight shattering against the tumbling mountain stream, which broke free of its rocky bed, spraying into hoary whitecaps that could bring even the most stalwart of creatures pause before attempting to ford. The night seemed electrified. The air bore a Novemberine crispness that seemed out of season this early in the harvest. Shuffling footsteps in the hall outside, and a sharp single knock on his door signaled Walter to make ready for the night's clandestine endeavors. He let the heavy woven curtain fall back into its place as he hopped down to the floor. A small tap on his cell door, and then it opened ever so quietly. There stood Brother Norman. "Come," he said in his cracked, badgery voice. The cloistered halls of the monastery were filled with long, dark shadows as the pair made their way silently to the blackened oak door in the farthest reaches of the eastern nave. Walter had never taken much notice of the door before tonight, thinking it sealed, as it was never used by any of the brothers and was partially obscured by tall ornamental lampstands. Brother Norman quietly slid one of the gilt lampstands across the slate floor, making only the slightest of echoes through the cloister. He stood very still for a moment, looking deeply into the shadowy hall, then removed a large key from his robe and unlocked the small door. He pulled it open slowly, intent on making no sound, but one loud crack of the old hinges made him freeze completely. He motioned with a nod of his head for Walter to go through the open door, and he then quickly followed, leaving it standing open. "Quickly," the old badger whispered, bringing his enormous paw to his lips in a gesture of silence. They crossed the inner courtyard to the low stone wall that bordered the Brotherhood's small vineyard, and there they met with two other robed beasts whom Walter recognized in the light of the moon as Father Pederick and Father Brendan. Without saying a single word, they turned to the open field and set out for the forest that lay at its farthest edge. Walter understood that there was some great event beginning to unfold with tonight's clandestine activities, but he had no real knowledge of what part he played and why he had been asked to participate. He only knew what Brother Norman had impressed on him, and that was the absolute necessity of secrecy and obedience, and what he would be told all, and that he would be told all later. After nearly a half-hour's march through the bare autumn brambles and branches of the wood, the only sound being the soft crush of their sandaled feet on the dead leaves and snapping twigs, Walter knew they had arrived at their destination when he could see the smallest flicker of firelight through the weave of dark trees. Upon emerging into a small clearing, their fellowship of 4 expanded to 7, having now met with 3 other badgers who dressed in homespun cloths of their order. They all stood silent for a few moments, the only acknowledgement of one another's presence being the slightest of nods, accompanied by anticipatory glances. The deeds of this night bore a great consequence of penalty, and they were all, in one sense or another, in very great danger. And everyone knew why, but rather than speak of it aloud, they silently huddled close around the small, hastily constructed stone altar, pulling the folds of their woolen robes tightly around them. The moonlight, being obscured by the thick, crisscrossing branches overhead, abdicated its power, making the solitary source of light the single oiled torch that had been thrust into the ground alongside the pile of stones. The guttering flame danced carefree on the wisps of wind that forced their way between the trees surrounding the closely encircled troop. Loosening the tattered rope belt of his garment, a stout, husky bear whiskers whitened from the tips of his eyebrows down around the corners of his mouth and off the end of his chin, reached inside his coarse woven robe and pulled out a small wooden box with corner pieces of tarnished silver, which cast reflective flickers of the torch's flame around the ring of holy beasts. Father Fitzsimmons wrapped his giant paws tightly around the box and drew it to his lips as if to place a kiss on its patinaed wood. He held it tightly close against his pursed lips, his eyes closed in deep, agonizing contemplation. So many years had passed since these things had been done. So many lives had come and gone, and now, for him, a beast of the cloth, a priest, to engage in such ritual. It was heresy, the stuff that sent so many to the stake to burn so many times before. Yet Father Fitzsimmons understood the task at hand. He knew that it needed to be done. Had not the bishop sent for him under the cover of night and implored him to perform this deed? And had he not also warned him that the church would never sanction the act publicly? Father Fitzsimmons knew that were the mysteries of this night's sacrilege ever to become known, the bishop would disavow any knowledge of his action and excommunicate him from the fold for the good of the church and the salvation of his soul. The old bear opened his eyes, nearly overwhelmed with his anxiety. He stooped forward a bit and placed the small box somewhat precariously atop the ramshackle stone altar. He let his paws hover momentarily over the box, as if he were about to reconsider the entire thing. Excuse me. Brother, whispered a robed badger from across the torched circle. Brother James. Father Fitzsimmons looked at his brother priest and slowly nodded, dropping one arm to his side, leaving his left paw poised over the box. He spoke in calm resolve. Ut quod must existo artificio sius, musto existo universa. Must existo universo, the rest of the holy beasts replied, as if reciting a responsive reading, as they each extended their paws to meet his in the center of the circle. It must be completed indeed. 7 in the circle, 7 to break the spell, 7 paws extending inward around the ring, 7 spokes of a wheel joined above the stone altar and the small wooden box. 4 were priests, 2 monks, and 1 young hare who was novice to Father Fitzsimmons, Walter O'Core by name, youngest heir to the Cormac O'Core, Lord of Ballyglenmorrow. It was he who was at the very heart of this night's doings. He, the last-born son of O'Core, promised to the church in hopes of recanting the wicked deeds that had spawned the evil of 3 generations past. An unwitting offering to God he was, little Walter. His presence here amongst these holiest of brethren would not be, were he not so. More to come. There you go, folks. That's it. That is part of the beginning to the Banshee of Ballyglenmorrow. And there's a lot more of that to come. So that's all we've got. We're pretty much done for tonight. And I appreciate the fact that you would once again spend your time with me and just let me read stories to you tonight. I hope it was as good for you as it was for me. So, until next time, Wednesday night, when we'll have another episode of the Intrepid radio program, I'm going to bid you a fair good night, and we're going to get out of Dodge. So thanks again for being here, for giving me your time, for being part of everything that's gone on here tonight. And you go have a good night's sleep, and we'll see you in a couple of days. Live long and prosper.